She would pounce on the whole place. So I'm sorry.
What you don't see in that video of the lioness pouncing the other lioness is that, and I didn't even see this because I was filming, within a split second there was a woman sitting on the other side of the safari truck, and when that happened she had jumped onto Julia's lap. So when I finished recording and looked back, there's this woman sitting on Julia's lap. Out of instinct she just grabbed onto Julia, held on for dear life, and in the video you can actually hear her apologizing to Julia. So I took these photos and captured some of these videos about a year ago, not about a year ago, about 10 months ago, and I've been putting off making this video, and I think it's because even though I love the photos that I managed to capture on this safari, I wasn't too happy with the video. For starters, I recorded this in log and I didn't take anything with me other than the camera and my lens. My Lumix S5 and the 24-105 f4. If I had been primarily interested in recording video and sharing video, I would have packed in my ND filter, but I didn't do that because I wanted to capture photos without the ND filter. I didn't want to get too mixed up and too focused on the tools that I was carrying with me. I just wanted to take in the animals. I wanted to see the animals and enjoy the experience. So it was just the camera and the lens, nothing more. And if I happened to get some decent video, that would be a bonus. And because I was experimenting with log footage, I didn't feel too confident with what I had. I was doing my own color corrections and my own color grading back when I first got this footage, and I wasn't too happy with what I was achieving. So I kind of thought I'd leave it in the back burner for a while and get back to it at some point. And I came across one of Pav's videos explaining how you can now use Adobe Premiere Pro to just automatically convert your footage. I found that worked so much better than adding the LUT from the Panasonic website. I don't know if it's something that I was doing wrong, but Adobe does this conversion of vlog to Rec 709, and from there the little bits of color grading that I did on top of that was so easy and so much more pleasant. So thank you to Pav for sharing that information. And just before we move on further, there was a set of steps that you had to do this, but there is now a more straightforward way of doing this whole color conversion from log to Rec 709. So I'll put that on the screen right now for you with the voice overlay. This is log footage. It's washed out and desaturated but contains more data. As you can see, I've dragged it into the timeline and it's still washed out and desaturated. Head on to File, Project Settings, navigate to Color, check the box that says Auto Detect Log Video Color Space, and you can now visualize the footage in Rec 709 color space. From here I can adjust the exposure and the color in a more easy manner. And now any footage that you drag in that is log will be converted automatically in Premiere Pro. Thanks Pav. But back to the photos and back to some of the video. This was in January, it was the beginning of the year. It might have actually even been New Year's Day. We went for a night at a place 2 hours away from Cape Town, and it's the closest you're going to get to safari at such a close distance to the CBD. And I'd have to say that the overall experience that we had was great. Julia's aunt and uncle came down from Italy and they just had such a great time. Our guide was super helpful and informative, gave us really interesting information while we're there, and we got to see a lot of cool animals. We did not get to see all 5 of the big 5. We missed the leopard, understandably so, because the leopards are free to do what they want and they're quite agile and, stealthy. The lions are kept in an enclosure that's separate to all the other animals, so I believe that the lions are fed. I don't know exactly, and I can't remember exactly what the story is behind these lions. I'm not sure if they're rescues of some sort, but let's go back to the photos, which are the primary focus of this video, as well as some of the video that I dip capped. Actually, you know what? Let's go straight into what I wrote down about my video footage. So as I mentioned, I did not pack in an ND filter, and this meant that there was a lot of sun hitting my sensor. And 24 frames per second, or no, I shoot 25 frames per second. 25 frames per second was not an appropriate frame rate, so I took it to 50 and also to 125. And because video wasn't the primary focus of what I was doing, I didn't pay too much attention on what format I was shooting in, and I believe I was shooting at full HD and not ultra HD, which is totally fine. I have found that even though I work in a 4K timeline, even if I put in 1080p footage in there and upscale it in the timeline, it turns out to be quite fine, or at least for my purposes. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the best thing to do professionally, but for my YouTube videos, it's more than enough. And in the instances where you're seeing footage where I've chosen not to upscale it, it's probably because I've missed focus and I'm a little embarrassed, but still feel that the scene was beautiful enough to share. And because I was shooting vlog, it was quite difficult to visualize what I was shooting. A lot of the footage that I shot in 125p, which I shot in variable frame rate in a 25 frame per second clip, I sped that up to look like real-time footage. So a lot of the footage that you are seeing that looks like real-time was actually shot in slow motion. Don't know why I thought you might need that information, but let's go through the photos. First things first, we weren't allowed to get out of our vehicle for understandable reasons. So a lot of my angles are not the most ideal angles that I would have liked to get shooting wildlife photography, but I made do with what I had. And there were some instances where I asked permission to stick my arms out of the truck so that I could get better angles. Obviously not when the lions were there, but in the other parts of the park I was able to get my hands out and get lower angles, which I preferred. But on the most part, I had to rely, with my editing, I had to rely on cropping, and I had to rely on some dramatic conversions to black and white because of how bright the conditions were. And I think this made for some beautiful, dramatic black and white photography that suits my style quite nicely, especially the rhinoceros mother and her calf. There were some instances, well, there's one photo in particular that you're seeing here where I cropped in quite heavily, and the loss in resolution from what you can see is not detrimental and still makes for a beautiful image in my opinion. With regard to the lions and the lionesses, there were some instances where I took photos that were both in color and black and white, and I couldn't choose which I preferred between both versions, so I kept black and white and color versions of some of my photos of the lion and the lionesses, and I've shared those at various different points in time on my Instagram grid. But I was fortunate enough to grab the lion at some decent angles for some really, should I say regal views, to regal edits. I don't know if regal is actually the correct word even, but he looked like a king of sorts. The conditions under which the zebras were recorded were more bright and more intense than some of the other animals that were surrounded by bushes and felt and stuff like that. The zebras were in open sand, which created for very bright environments in which I tried to film. A lot of the footage came out okay. My biggest problem was hitting focus actually. The photography came out beautiful and dramatic in my opinion. So I'm very happy that we got to see the zebras, the baby zebras. We also got to see some really cool landscapes. And my favorite one is this one over here of the bare trees on this open landscape with some hills in the background. The elephants. Let's just get this one out of the way. I just went crazy on this edit because I felt like it, and I had been playing around with infrared photography before, and I went all wonky for this edit, but don't worry, the other ones are not this colorful. I think this photo in particular is a lesson in just trusting how deeply you can crop your image, especially when you're shooting with a modern camera. If you nail your focus, there is reason to not be too afraid with how deeply you do crop your image. And I think this might be a full-on video of its own, but I'll quickly show you a photo of a canvas that I printed of this elephant, and I'll also just show you, I'll actually leave it for another video where this is not the original crop or the original zoom, the original field of view in which I captured this elephant. It was much more wide, and in post I really cropped in, first of all, to get a more decent balance, to get an overall balance in my crop, because if I'd included so much more of the sky and the background and the felt, it would have resulted in an unbalanced composition. Really getting in there on the subject with a very indistinguishable background and surrounds was what was necessary for this photo to be a success, in my opinion. And I was able to do so because I trusted my camera and the output it could create. Another important thing is this photo, if you were to see it, was underexposed, and I needed to do this to preserve information. I did not want to lose any information in the highlights, so that anything that came out higher in highlights was something that I put into the photo in post. And as I mentioned, I think it worked out pretty well, and I think this is going to be a full-on video in of itself in the future. The purpose of this video was to share some of the photos in video format here on my YouTube channel of a great 2 days that we spent at a safari 2 hours away from Cape Town. I'm very glad that we got to share that experience with two relatives that had never experienced anything like it before. I'm not sure we'll be returning anytime soon, but if I ever do, I might consider taking my GH5 with a more intense zoom lens. And on that topic, I think I could end this off discussing the kit lens that basically lives on my S5, the 24-105 f4. So I think that this is generally an important topic, and this is based on questions that I receive on social media and also here on YouTube on my videos. F4 is not a limiting aperture on full frame. Unless you are regularly shooting at night or you regularly shoot video in low light situations where you have limited control over added light, I think the predominance of photographers will find f4 on a full frame system decent. If you're concerned about depth of field, get further away from your subject and zoom in from there. That will help you produce a more shallow depth of field behind your subject. When it comes to a kit lens like this one that I'm talking about, I think the predominance of the perceived limitation comes from the user. I find it bizarre when I receive questions on whether a lens is good or not, especially when we are considering modern lenses designed for electronic contact with modern cameras. Take that with a grain of salt, of course, but considering the affordability of this kit lens, especially if going pre-owned like I did, the focal range and constant aperture features of this lens make for a profoundly convenient range of possibilities. And the cool thing about this is that the more new lenses that are released, the more affordable lenses like this one will become. The newest and the bestest and the most expensive is not necessary for a satisfying photographic experience and for satisfying and artistically fulfilling outcomes. I've said this before when discussing my Lumix 12-60 f3.5 to 5.6 for my GH5. You are the limit on the most part. And with all that I've just said about this lens, apply that to the lens that you have at home with you right now. Make that lens work for you and work to have that spark come back if it has become lost. That's it for today. Right.